Okay, in this section we're going to take a look at how we deal with errors that occur in our application. It's an important thing to take a look at. It goes without saying that any application can encounter errors. We have user-based errors where a user could do something wrong or we're not handling in our application or unexpected. And also we can get server-side errors. Sometimes we might not have enough resources. Sometimes we've got a logic error, and all of these things need to be handled in some way, or they're going to fail silently, or they could potentially crash our application. So we're going to start off in the Solution Explorer. And so that we can take a look at different kinds of errors, we're going to create a controller. And this is something that I'm just doing because it's a training course and it's not something I would do in a normal application. But to give us a look at the different kind of errors we can encounter, and the different kinds of ways that we can handle these errors. Inside controllers, I'm just going to right click, add new file, create a new class, and I'm just going to call this buggy controller. And this controller is just going to be responsible for returning errors to the client. And we're going to derive from the base API controller here. And also we're just going to inject the data context into this class as well. And we're going to create some endpoints. And we'll have an HTTP GET. And this one's just going to be to test authentication effectively. And I'm going to say public. And I'm not going to even worry about asynchronous code here. This is really just for demonstration and testing purposes. So for convenience, I'm just going to create the code in the shortest way possible. And this is going to return a string. And I'm just going to say get auth as the name of this method. And I'm just going to return secret text. But for this one, because we're going to test the authentication errors, I'm going to specify authorize attribute on this one. Now, I'm just going to copy this endpoint down a few more times and adjust the endpoints accordingly. And reformat things, and let's go to the second endpoint. And this one is just going to be able to test the not found response that we get from an API controller. So I'm just going to say get not found. So the root parameter is going to be not found, and the method name, I'm just calling this get not found. And we're going to return from this, well, let's say, for example, we were trying to get an app user that doesn't exist. And we will interrogate our database and say var thing equals context .users, and we're going to try and find a user with the ID of -1, which cannot exist in our database, and we're just going to check to see if the thing is equal to null, and if it is, then we're going to return not found, and otherwise we're going to return thing. And the next one we'll take a look at is the server error, and we'll specify get server error here, and we'll do something that's going to generate an error. So if I was to say var thing equals context .users .find and -1, and I say toString, then it's kind of difficult to make the point that this could catch us out because of these nullable reference types. Then in order to generate what used to be a very common type of error, which would be a null reference error, then we try and do an action, or we try and take an action with something that is null. So for instance, every object in C# has a method available to it called toString, which converts it into a string, of course. But not null. Null does not have a toString method available on it. So if we try and execute or call a toString method on something that is null, we are guaranteed to get a null reference exception. But the idea of these nullable reference types was to prevent us from doing something silly like this. Because we get this warning shouted at us saying, hey, this could be null, what you're trying to do here, and you don't want to do that. So we'll take a slightly different approach to what I used to do. We'll check to see if it's null, and if it is, then we'll just generate our own exception. So I'll generate a new exception, and I'll just say a bad thing has happened. And the goal of this really is, and I'll come back to this soon, but we want to system where we handle errors at a high level. And typically in our code, we would have these try-catch blocks where we would try some code that could possibly fail, and then we would catch the error and we'd deal with it on a case-by-case basis. The goal of this particular section is to look at a more centralized approach to error handling so that we don't need to litter our code with try-catch blocks. So I'll throw an exception if this is null, and I'll return an app user if it is not, and just return thing from this method. And we'll also have one for a bad request. So I'll say bad-request. And the bad request is a HTTP 400 type of response. And these are typically called user-related errors. So if a user fails validation, for example, that would be a user type error. So any errors in the 400 to 499 range are considered user-side errors, such as a 404 not found would be considered a user error because they've asked to find something that doesn't exist. Or a bad request, we've already implemented this in our register. So if they try and create a username that already exists, then we're returning a bad request for that one. But in this example, just so that we can get the formatting and display the correct user interface component to the user, we're just going to return a bad request from here, just so that we've got something to work with. And we'll just say this was not a good request in the error message. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and I don't need the last one. We'll just have 4. We will also deal with validation error types as well, but we're just going to use our register method to test that one. So with these in place, because we've created a new controller, then we're going to have to restart our API. And of course, it's complaining as per usual. So I'm just going to stop the server from running and restart it. And we'll head across to Postman to test what we have right now. So inside section 7, there's a bunch of requests to get different kinds of errors. Now this one says get null ref error, but we can't really generate that without purposely adding warnings into our application. So we're going to get a server error. This is the endpoint that we're calling here. So if I click send, then we do get the exception. A bad thing has happened. That's what we'd expect because we cannot find a user with -1. And inside the exception, we get the location of where the error occurred. So line 31 in the buggy controller. And if we were to take a look at line 31 in the buggy controller, then of course this is the exception that we're throwing because we cannot find a user with -1. So that's fine. And if we take a look at the get auth error, then we'd expect to see this return a 401. The user is unauthorized and it's a user side error. They're not authenticated, even though these user errors could really be server errors. If we've configured our API server badly, then that could be our fault, but it's still considered a user error. And if we take a look at what we get for the not found kind of error, and we send this one, then we get a kind of response, a different kind of response because we've got something in the body of the response, but effectively it's got a status code of 404 and a message of not found. And if we take a look at the bad request and we click send, then we just get the text response saying this was not a good request. And finally, we've got our get validation error. And if we send this one, and we get a kind of weird response for this one, and it says JSON's deserialization for API register DTO was missing and the register DTO field is required. So we need to go and take a look at that one because that's not a good response for us to work with on the client side. We need something better. So let's go back and take a look at what we're doing inside our register DTO that's causing that kind of weird response. Now what we have here is this required. Now this is a good thing for Entity Framework, but it's not a good thing when it comes to validation of our fields inside here. And if I take away required, and I'll just accept the warning for the short term and fix it soon, just to show you the difference of the type of response that we get. And I'll see if I can just send this request again. And no, of course not. Hot module reloading interesting. It looks like it's restarted okay. And if I send again? No. Okay. So I'm going to have to restart. Apparently, hot reloading has completely given up. And okay, so we see the warnings, but I'm expecting those, and that's fine. And we'll go back to Postman, and if I click send again, then we get the what I consider to be the more appropriate response for a validation error. We get the errors array, and then we've got the password and the username along with its validation error. Let's also add something else to the password. So we've got additional validators, and I'm just going to add the string length and give it a string length of 8, and that's the maximum, and we'll set a minimum length equal to 4. And okay, hot reloading says it's done its thing, but if I go back to Postman and I send this again, yeah, that didn't work either. Okay, so let's try restarting once again and see if that has the desired effect, because I should see 2 validation errors for the password. And I'll head back to Postman, I'll click on send, and that's still not quite what we're looking for here. So we need to do a bit more, and let's deal with these warnings. Now, we've got the required data annotations here. So we're not going to be able to create or register a user without supplying these values. And when we add the required property or attribute here, that causes us a weird validation error. So I'm going to take the approach to initialize these values with string.empty. And this just gets rid of the warning, and it should fix the issues with validation that we currently have. Now, because I've got 3 different validators, when I send up an empty username and password, I want to see 3 different things coming back to tell me what's wrong. And if I click on send again, this time we get the correct kind of response. This is what we want to see. We've got 3 validation errors, and I want to see all of them in the response. So that takes care of our little buggy controller, but I want to focus on the server-side error, this get null ref error, and we're going to take a look at this next.